Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today, we're going to do something a little different and take a look at this book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah, we're going to dive into the author's personal experiences and, see if their advice still holds up today and can help people make, smarter financial decisions.
Okay, so the book really emphasizes, uh, this whole concept of assets and liabilities, and they even go so far as to say,
Yeah,
um, rich people acquire assets, the poor and middle class acquire liabilities that they think are assets.
it's a bold statement for sure.
Yeah,
But, they back it up with these like clear, almost shockingly simple diagrams.
right.
Assets put money in your pocket, liabilities take money out.
Yeah.
And I think it really does highlight, we need to understand which is which when we're making financial decisions.
Yeah, I'm grappling with this idea that home ownership can be a liability.
Right.
It goes against everything I was ever taught.
Yeah.
Growing up, my parents always said, buy a house. That's the best investment you can make.
Yeah.
It's a common belief, but the author has a very interesting counter argument.
Yeah.
And they point out that, a house, especially your primary residence, it acts more like a liability in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
draining your cash flow with mortgage payments and property taxes and maintenance, all that stuff.
And they even calculate how those expenses can actually hinder your ability to,
Exactly.
invest in income-producing assets that could be building your wealth over time.
Yeah, they're saying, your focus should be on acquiring assets that generate income, not just, accumulating things that look good on paper.
Right. So that leads right into their definition of wealth, which is quite different than how we normally think of wealth.
Yeah, completely different.
It's not how much money do you have, it's how many days forward could you survive,
Right.
based solely on the cash flow from your assets.
Yeah. It's not about your net worth or possessions.
Right.
It's about how sustainable is your financial situation.
Yeah.
It's about having your money work for you, not the other way around.
And they gave an example of being able to retire early because their asset column generated enough passive income
Right.
to cover their expenses,
Exactly.
which is inspiring.
Yeah.
But it also makes you wonder, like, what are these magical assets
Yeah.
they keep talking about?
Well, they don't really give, specific financial advice.
Right.
But they share a lot of anecdotes about their rich dad, who was their mentor.
Yeah.
And, he emphasized real estate and business ownership as, key wealth building strategies.
Right.
And, they contrasted this with his own father, who was highly educated, but struggled financially.
Yeah. And it really highlights the financial intelligence,
Yes.
not just, education or high income,
Yeah,
is really key to long-term success.
absolutely. They stress that understanding how money works
Yeah.
is crucial. And they even, compare financial literacy to like understanding the numbers in accounting. Like you need to know how to analyze a financial statement to really mind your own business.
Yeah. It's almost like, you need a financial mentor kind of guiding you through this,
Yeah,
because, we get so much conventional advice,
right.
like, buy a house.
hmm
That's always a good investment.
Yeah, and they point out that that's not always the case.
Yeah.
And, it reminds me of that story they tell about the richest businessmen in America in the 1920s.
So, yeah.
A lot of those guys ended up bankrupt during the Great Depression.
Right.
Having money and knowing how to manage it.
Yeah.
Two different things.
It's like easy come, easy go.
Yeah, exactly.
And, without that financial literacy, you could even win the lottery
Right.
and end up right back where you started.
Yeah, and the book really argues that, money often just magnifies our existing financial habits.
That's interesting.
If your pattern is to spend everything you earn,
Yeah.
you get a raise, you just spend more
Right.
instead of using that money to build wealth.
So instead of focusing on earning more, we should focus on changing how we handle the money we already have.
That's the core idea. And they even compare it to, like if you're in a hole
Yeah.
and you just keep digging.
Right. Instead of climbing out.
Instead of earning more, you need to understand where your money is going.
Right.
And create a system that actually works for you.
And that's where this whole concept of minding your own business comes in.
Yeah, and they're not saying everyone needs to quit their job and become an entrepreneur.
Right.
It's more about having an entrepreneurial mindset.
Yeah.
Focusing on building an asset column that can generate income,
Right.
even when you're not actively working.
So you could have a regular 9-to-5 job, but still be minding your own business
Exactly.
by, investing in rental properties or building a side hustle or.
Precisely. It's about developing multiple streams of income
Right.
and gradually reducing your dependence on that single paycheck.
Yeah. And they use these cash flow diagrams
Oh.
to illustrate like the way that the poor, the middle class, and the wealthy handle their money.
Yeah, they show how the poor often have expenses that actually exceed their income,
Right.
leaving them with nothing to invest.
Yeah.
And then the middle class, they often fall into that trap of like, as their income rises,
Yeah.
their expenses rise.
Their lifestyle inflates.
Yeah, and they end up in more debt and more financial struggle.
It's like they're running on a treadmill, working harder and harder,
Exactly.
but not really getting ahead.
Yeah, and then you contrast that with the rich dad's financial statement.
Yeah.
It's like a stark contrast. He's focused on building this robust asset column
Yeah.
that generates enough passive income to cover all of his expenses.
Right.
And then any extra money he uses to acquire even more assets.
It's like a snowball effect.
Exactly.
As your assets grow, so does the income they produce,
Yeah.
leading to even more assets.
And this is really the power of compounding when it comes to building wealth. But they also point out that, the middle class often misses out on these potentially lucrative opportunities
Right.
because they're so focused on, paying off debt and covering expenses.
Mm-hmm.
They end up playing it safe, not because they're not smart,
Right.
but because their financial situation is so precarious.
Yeah, so they're stuck in this cycle of working for others,
Right.
their employer, the government, through taxes,
Exactly.
the banks,
Mm-hmm.
through mortgages and loans.
Yeah. And the author really argues that, this lack of financial education
Yeah.
actually creates risk for the average person.
Right.
It forces them to rely on that single paycheck and avoid potentially lucrative opportunities.
It's like you're trapped in someone else's system
Exactly.
and building your own.
Yeah, and that brings us back to, their definition of true wealth.
Right.
It's not about your net worth.
Yeah.
It's about how long could you survive financially if you stopped working today.
That's a powerful concept.
Yeah, it is. And they even, borrow this thought-provoking definition from Buckminster Fuller,
Yep.
the architect who invented the geodesic dome.
Yeah.
And he said, wealth is a person's ability to survive so many number of days forward. Or if I stopped working today, how long could I survive?
That's great.
It's a brilliant way to shift the focus from possessions
Right.
to the actual sustainability of your financial situation.
Yeah, it's not how much stuff you have.
Right.
It's about how long.
Can it sustain you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about, measuring the cash flow from your assets against your expenses
Right.
and seeing how long you can maintain your lifestyle
Mm-hmm.
without relying on a job.
And the author even gives, a personal example.
Okay.
They say if their asset column generated $1,000 a month, but their monthly expenses were $2,000,
Yeah.
they would only be wealthy for half a month.
Right.
So it really makes you think about how you're building your financial foundation.
Mhm.
It challenges these conventional notions of wealth and emphasizes the importance of creating a system where your money works for you, not the other way around.
Yeah.
It's about taking control of your financial destiny and building a future where you're not living paycheck to paycheck.
And it all starts with understanding the difference between an asset and a liability,
Exactly.
which is where the book's advice, I think, gets really interesting.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at some specific strategies the author suggests for minding your own business.
Okay. So the author uses this surprising example to illustrate this idea. Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's.
That's an interesting choice. What does a fast food empire have to do with personal finance?
Well, it's not about the burgers. It's about systems.
Hmm.
Kroc didn't invent the hamburger,
Right.
but he built a business empire
Yeah.
by understanding the system that could create and sell them efficiently.
So it's about recognizing opportunities and building a system that can generate wealth.
Precisely, the author argues that we often focus too much on the product
Right.
or the job instead of the underlying system that produces value.
So it's like we're so focused on the car rolling off the assembly line
Right?
that we forget about the entire factory that makes it possible.
Exactly. And that's how minding your own business comes into play.
Yeah,
It's
but-
about creating a system that generates income even when you're not actively working on it.
Okay, so how can we apply this system thinking to personal finance?
Well, the author suggests, building a business alongside your job,
Mhm.
even if it starts small.
So creating multiple streams of income
Right.
beyond your regular paycheck.
Exactly. They argue that a job provides temporary income,
Right.
but a business has the potential to create lasting wealth and freedom.
Okay, so it's about shifting your mindset from employee to entrepreneur.
And that doesn't mean you have to quit your job tomorrow.
Right.
It's about developing your financial literacy.
Yeah.
and building assets that generate income, gradually reducing your reliance on that single paycheck.
So using your current job to fuel your entrepreneurial ventures.
Exactly. And as you learn and grow, you might find that your business eventually provides enough income to replace your job entirely.
Right.
But that comes later.
Yeah.
First, you need to develop your financial intelligence.
And how do you suggest doing that?
Well, the author really emphasizes learning from those who've already achieved financial success. You know, find mentors,
Okay.
study the strategies of successful investors and business owners.
Just like the author's rich dad.
Exactly.
Shared his knowledge and, challenged conventional financial thinking.
Right. Surround yourself with people who can offer guidance
Yeah.
and a different perspective on money.
Yeah.
You might even find opportunities to partner with them on business ventures.
Okay, this all sounds great. But the author mentions, retiring early. How did they build their own asset column?
Well, they don't get into specific details, but
Right.
they emphasize the power of real estate investing.
Which is interesting because they also say that a house can be a liability. So how does that work?
Well, they differentiate between a personal residence
Right.
and an income-producing property.
So buying a house to live in might not be the best investment,
Mhm.
but owning rental properties that generate cash flow could help build wealth.
That's the idea. They also advocate for, investing in businesses,
Okay.
either starting your own
Yeah.
or partnering with other entrepreneurs.
It's all about creating value and building something that generates income instead of just trading your hours for a paycheck.
Right. The author encourages, a proactive approach to wealth building
Yeah.
rather than passively relying on a job or a savings account.
So it's about taking control of your financial destiny instead of letting someone else dictate your financial future.
Exactly. And they emphasize that, this journey requires continuous learning and adaptation.
Right, because the world of finance is constantly changing.
Exactly.
And financial literacy isn't a one-time achievement. It's an ongoing process.
The author encourages us to stay informed, question assumptions, and always be on the lookout for new opportunities.
And they use this interesting concept, the Japanese concept of the three powers, to kind of illustrate this point.
Oh, yeah, the sword of weapons, the jewel of money, and the mirror of self-knowledge.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How do those three relate to financial success?
Well, the author argues that, while money and even force have their uses, true power comes from understanding yourself
Okay.
and how you relate to money.
So they're saying that the middle class often gets trapped by the allure of money,
Right.
working harder and harder, but not really getting ahead.
It's like running on a treadmill.
Yeah,
You're putting in the effort,
but not going anywhere.
but not really moving forward.
And the mirror of self-reflection is about recognizing those patterns and making conscious choices to break free from that.
Exactly. It's about defining your values and your
Yeah.
goals and then creating a system that aligns with them.
This is so much more than just like tips on budgeting or saving.
Yeah.
This is about taking control of your life.
Absolutely. It's a long-term journey,
Yeah.
not a get-rich-quick scheme.
And they encourage us to start that journey as early as possible, even teaching our children
Yes.
about money and investing and entrepreneurship.
They argue that financial education should start in childhood,
Yeah.
just like they learned from their rich dad.
It's about equipping the next generation with the financial knowledge and skills that so many adults lack.
And, they suggest that schools often fail to prepare students for the real world of finance. They focus on getting a job, not building wealth.
Which leaves so many people feeling lost and powerless when it comes to managing their money.
Exactly. And the author encourages us to, challenge that system
Yeah.
by seeking out financial education outside of the traditional classroom.
It's about taking responsibility for your financial well-being instead of relying on outdated advice or hoping someone else will take care of it for you.
And that's where Rich Dad, Poor Dad can be so valuable.
Yeah.
It sparks a conversation about the importance of financial literacy and encourages readers to think differently about money.
I know the book has been controversial.
Oh, yeah.
Some people love it.
Mm-hmm.
Others criticize it for
Well,
being oversimplified or even misleading.
that's true. It's important to approach any financial advice,
Right.
including this book, with a critical eye.
Yeah.
The author's personal experiences and opinions
Right.
might not apply to everyone's situation.
It's crucial to do your own research and consult with qualified financial professionals before making any major decisions.
But even with those caveats, Rich Dad, Poor Dad raises important questions about traditional financial advice.
Yeah.
And it encourages readers to challenge their assumptions about money.
It's a call to action, to examine our beliefs
Yes.
and our habits, and to seek out alternative paths to financial freedom.
It reminds us that we have more control over our financial future than we might think.
So what does this all mean for our listeners?
Well, we're going to explore some key takeaways.
Okay, and leave you with a thought-provoking question to ponder.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, from understanding assets and liabilities to exploring how the rich, the poor, and the middle class view and manage their money.
And we discussed the author's unique definition of wealth, not as a measure of how much you have,
Right.
but rather how long you could survive without relying on a paycheck.
And we even touched on some of their suggested strategies for building that asset column.
Yeah, like real estate investing.
Right, or starting a business.
Mm-hmm.
But at the heart of it all, the key takeaway from Rich Dad, Poor Dad is the power of financial literacy.
It really is. It's about understanding how money truly works
Yeah.
and then using that knowledge to make informed decisions about your financial future.
It's about questioning common assumptions and looking for alternative perspectives
Exactly.
that might challenge the way you've always thought about money.
It's about recognizing that you have the power to take control of your destiny and build a future where you're not, constantly stressed about money or living paycheck to paycheck.
And what's so encouraging is that this is a journey anyone can embark on,
Absolutely.
no matter what their current financial situation looks like.
It starts with a single step.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Rich Dad, Poor Dad, we want to leave you with a thought-provoking question
Okay.
to consider. If you could stop working today, how long could you survive financially?
That's the question Rich Dad, Poor Dad really challenges us to ask ourselves.
It is.
It's a way to measure your true wealth, not just in terms of dollars and cents,
Yes.
but in terms of freedom and security.
So take some time to reflect on that question
Yeah.
and consider what steps you can take to strengthen your financial foundation.
Maybe it's learning more about investing or exploring a side hustle,
Yeah.
or simply becoming more aware of your spending habits.
Remember, every small step, even just starting the conversation, can make a difference on your path to financial independence.
It's not about getting rich quick. It's about building a sustainable system that supports your personal goals and values.
And that all begins with financial literacy. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
We hope you found it valuable, and we'll see you next time.